Evolution and carbon dating were the first sciences that were assaulted, and that was long before there was an attack against medicine. Hi, it's Dr. Alan Lifton from Brainsplained. I wanted to talk about Tylenol and failure to deal with reality and assault on science. This is hopefully the last time I have to discuss the Tylenol situation. I did make that TikTok video about Tylenol, but that format doesn't allow thorough explanation of things, so I think I should go over it, and I think I should go over it in a way that helps us understand. And probably this is more for those of us who have to take care of patients than the patients themselves. So I started getting really upset about this topic probably forever ago. And I used to complain about the people that don't accept gravity. And I was upset about the people who don't accept gravity because gravity, I think, is on the same scientific footing as doing something like radioisotope dating, which is commonly called carbon dating, although carbon is not the only isotope that's measured, but radioisotope decay can tell us the age of something. Carbon only goes to, I'm not good with time, but it's only good for 60 or 70,000 years, and then they use other isotopes. And all of the isotope stuff is called colloquially carbon dating, but it's not always carbon. And I used to be upset about people who didn't accept evolution. And I think evolution and carbon dating were the first sciences that were assaulted, and that was long before there was an attack against medicine and long before there was an attack against climate science. Medicine and science are actually not unique, and there's a book called Death of Expertise by Tom Nichols, and he talks about factors that are involved in individuals who are susceptible to not being able to accept expertise. And he talks a little bit also about issues related to media coverage of expertise. And a similar book that dovetails into that and talks also about more compassionately emotional context things of how people think is a book called Divided Nation, Divided Politics by Adam West. And those two books together both explore the psyche of the individual person who is an anti-science person. It's a bunch of fear, it's a lot of anger, it's some of the way things are presented in the media, and it's also identity, according to both of those guys. But I think identity is really, really critical here. And identity is a thing people will die for. If you change someone's identity, they're willing to kill you. They're willing to die for their identity. Right now, this minute, as I make this video, Ukrainians are dying. They're going to war and dying. They're getting killed. And they're getting killed only because they don't want to be Russian. Many, many people would be affected by Russia taking over Ukraine in a lot of ways other than identity, but the only change would be identity. If I'm a rural person and I live in, the backwoods of Ukraine somewhere and I'm farming, who is in charge of me, and whether the government is the Ukrainian government or the Russian government isn't going to change my life in that substantial of a way. Obviously, that's not true for everyone, but many of those people for whom life would not change would still die for the privilege of being identified as a Ukrainian. They don't want to become not that. Your identity changes quite rarely in a substantial and significant way. For example, I'm a married man, I have a wife, but if I lost my wife, the second that occurs, I'm now a widower, or I'm something else. That loss of identity is devastating. It's hard to separate the loss of identity from the loss, but it's true because people also will experience similar drastic changes when they shift from being whatever they are to being retired. I see a lot of retirement-related depression because people have a new identity now, and it's hard to handle. Why that's affected by science is because if my identity is that of a religious person who believes in literal interpretation of Scripture, I can't be that. I can't be in the fellowship, I can't be in the church, I can't be a participator of that religion, and I can't be a holy person if I agree that carbon dating is real, or if I believe that evolution is real. And it's problematic because of the fact that it's not just that I can reject one science without rejecting all of science, right? Because the fundamental principles behind using information like radioisotope decay and whatever we've come up with in medicine, or whatever we've come up with in the modeling of climate change, or whatever we've come up with in terms of healthcare and vaccine science, it's all the same science, right? It's all the same basic principles. It's all the same math. It's all the same statistics. It's all the same physics. And it's all the same utilization of an experimental model in which we develop a hypothesis and then we test it. And that's why I was always so upset. If I'm going to reject the fact that the Earth is 4.5 billion years old, if I'm going to reject the fact that, there are genes, I mean, we have genes. We've identified them. We know there's evolution. If I'm going to reject that, I have to reject all science. And in fact, that's happening. There's a guy named Michael Mann and another person named Peter Hotez, and those guys got together and wrote a book more recently called Science Under Siege. And that's a different piece of this puzzle. This is a separate part. These people who their identity is being threatened, and they're being put in situations where they're scared of a world that doesn't make sense, where they're angry because their definitions of things are changing. That's not the whole thing, because that's not necessarily what accounts for the anti-science, because it's not all organic. This isn't coming from the ground up, not really. So in Science Under Siege, these guys write about the forces promoting that. Right, so there's some petrol states, there's some very powerful petrol states, there's some incredibly rich people making money off of oil. There's some, whatever you want to call these guys, these billionaires, the plutocrats or oligarchs, or some super powerful people who are interested in promoting a certain perspective, and they're loosely affiliated with or coordinating with some politicians, and they've enticed some professional people who are willing to sell their soul to participate in making claims that are just preposterous, despite the fact that they know better because of economic enrichment. And there's some irresponsibility in the media, and that there's a kind of concerted war on science because it is economically beneficial for forces that want to pursue that, and that those forces are driving a lot of this anti-science that's happening. So the Tylenol is a real thing. Anti-science is happening. And the situation that's driving these people to be so passionate about this stuff are somewhat complicated. The 3 books that I mentioned are in the links down below in case you want to read them. Anyway, I hope that's Brain Splained.